The day my billionaire grandfather's will was read, I thought I'd at least be remembered with dignity. My father inherited a mansion, my brother Ethan received stocks worth millions, and my aunts walked away with land and yachts. When it was my turn, the lawyer placed a single rusted key in my hand. Dad smirked. "A rundown garage? You're nothing, Sophia." Ethan burst out laughing, his voice echoing in the silent room. Humiliation burned through me, but that night, I couldn't let it go. I clutched the key so tightly it cut into my palm. If this was all my grandfather left me, I needed to see why. So I drove across town to the industrial district. The iron door screeched open, my flashlight trembling in my hand. What I saw inside made my heart stop. There was no way my billionaire grandpa left me this. The lawyer's office smelled of old leather and polished wood, the kind of room where legacies were decided and futures destroyed. I sat stiffly in my chair, hands clasped together, pretending not to hear the whispers darting around the room. My heart hammered, but I forced myself to stay composed. Mr. Harper, the family lawyer, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. His voice was measured, deliberate, as he read aloud the will my grandfather had left behind. "To my son Richard Carter, I leave the family estate and all properties attached." Dad leaned back in his chair, his mouth curving into a satisfied smile. The room erupted in approving murmurs. "To my grandson Ethan Carter, I leave the investment portfolio valued at approximately $25 million. Ethan smirked, straightening his expensive tie. He gave me a sidelong glance, his eyes glinting with triumph. "Guess we know who Grandpa trusted with the real money," he whispered just loud enough for me to hear. I clenched my fists beneath the table, my nails digging into my palms. Names rolled on my aunts, my uncles, even cousins I barely spoke to. They were granted land, shares, even a yacht. Each announcement drew gasps of delight and sly grins. Then came the silence. The lawyer's voice lowered, his gaze shifting to me. "To my granddaughter Sophia Carter, I leave a garage in the industrial district, along with the key to it." The words landed like a thunderclap. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. My throat tightened, heat rising up my neck as the room fell into an awkward hush. Then Dad broke the silence. He leaned forward, his smile razor-sharp. "A garage? That's fitting." His chuckle grew into a laugh, bitter and loud. "Even your grandfather knew you'd never amount to anything, Sophia." Ethan doubled over, cackling. "Maybe it's filled with old tires and broken tools. Perfect for you, sis." My face burned as the laughter stabbed through me, each sound a reminder of how little they thought of me. "Enough. My mother," Linda whispered sharply, placing her hand over mine. Her eyes shimmered with sympathy. "Don't let them get to you. Your grandfather never did anything without a reason." But Dad only shook his head, sneering. "A reason? He gave away fortunes and left her a junk heap. That's not a reason, it's an insult." The others murmured in agreement, hiding their smirks behind polite hands. I wanted to scream, to slam my fists on the table and demand an explanation. But the key sat in my hand, heavy and rusted, flaking red dust into my palm. The humiliation was suffocating. As the meeting adjourned, Ethan slapped me on the back. "Don't worry, Sophia. Maybe you can live in your garage. I'll come by with some beer cans to decorate the place." My blood boiled, but I stayed silent. I couldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Outside, the summer air was thick and stifling, pressing against my chest like an invisible weight. I looked down at the key once more. It wasn't just metal, it was a brand, searing me with shame. Yet, in the pit of that humiliation, a spark flickered. Grandpa had believed in me once, when no one else did. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to this garage than what my father and brother thought. I whispered under my breath, so quiet even I barely heard it. "I'll find out, Grandpa. I'll prove them wrong." The next morning, I woke in my cramped apartment to the sound of my alarm buzzing at 6 a.m. The ceiling above me was cracked, a spiderweb of lines that hadn't been painted in years. I rolled out of bed and brushed past the clutter of secondhand furniture, the kind people donate because they're too embarrassed to sell. This was my reality. While Ethan drove his gleaming sports car to a corner office at his prestigious law firm, I boarded the stifling bus to downtown Chicago. My job as a junior secretary at an insurance company paid just enough to cover rent and instant noodles. Every day I sat at a small desk surrounded by gray partitions, filing endless paperwork and answering phones for bosses who barely remembered my name. At lunch, I ate alone in the break room while my coworkers exchanged inside jokes and flashy weekend plans. They wore designer handbags. I clutched a chipped coffee mug. Whenever Ethan's name came up in family conversations, his promotions, his high-rise apartment, his glamorous girlfriend, my parents' eyes glowed with pride. When it came to me, Dad only sighed, shaking his head like I was some permanent disappointment. I told myself it didn't matter, but every look, every whisper chipped away at me. That evening, as I walked home through the fading city lights, I caught my reflection in a store window. Tired eyes, hair tied back in a messy bun, shoulders slumped under the weight of exhaustion. I barely recognized myself. Back at the apartment, my two roommates laughed on the couch, binging sitcom reruns. I slipped into my tiny room and shut the door, sinking onto the bed. From my nightstand, I picked up the rusted key Grandpa had left me. The metal was cold, jagged against my skin. I remembered the nights we used to sit together on the porch of his farmhouse, the cicadas humming in the summer dark. He'd lean back in his chair, his deep voice weaving stories of his youth. "Life's an adventure, Sophia," he'd tell me. "Don't fear failure. Fear never taking the first step." At the time, I'd smiled politely, never believing those words were meant for me. But now, holding that key, I felt his voice echoing in my chest. Ethan's laughter still rang in my ears. Dad's cruel smirk still burned in my memory. They thought I was nothing. Maybe they were right. My life so far proved them correct. No wealth, no prestige, no place at the family table. But what if Grandpa was giving me a chance? What if this key wasn't just a cruel joke, but something else? I clenched it tighter, my pulse quickening. Tomorrow I'd work another meaningless day at the office, smile at clients, and go home to my peeling apartment walls. But tonight I could choose something different. I stared at the key, under the lamplight. Rust clung to my fingers, staining my skin. Yet beneath the corrosion was metal, solid and unyielding. Maybe, just maybe, that was Grandpa's message. I whispered into the empty room. "You believed in me, didn't you? Even when no one else did." The hum of the city outside filled the silence. My chest tightened with a mix of fear and determination. For the first time in years, I felt the faint stirrings of a purpose I couldn't explain. The night air was heavy when I stepped off the bus, the city's glow fading behind me as I entered the West Side Industrial District. Streetlights flickered weakly, casting broken shadows across rows of abandoned warehouses. The farther I walked, the quieter it became. No traffic, no laughter, just the lonely whistle of wind through rusted metal. The key weighed in my pocket like a curse. Dad's words echoed, "You're nothing, Sophia." Ethan's laughter played on repeat, cruel and sharp. I clenched my fists, my pulse pounding. I could have gone home, crawled into bed, and pretended the garage didn't exist. But humiliation gnawed at me, and a strange defiance rose in my chest. If this was my inheritance, I would face it head-on. Even if it was just rats and dust, I'd prove to myself and to them that I wasn't afraid. I found the building after nearly an hour of walking. It stood squat and forgotten, its concrete walls cracked, streaked with grime. A faded sign above the heavy iron door bore one word: Carter, my surname. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Grandpa had left this to me, and me alone. The street around me was deserted, the silence broken only by the clink of my shoes against the pavement. My heart thudded like a drum as I pulled the key from my pocket. Rust flaked off in my palm, staining my skin red-brown. I whispered, as if speaking to him, "Why, Grandpa? Why this place?" The key slid into the lock with surprising ease. For a moment, I hesitated, my hand trembling on the cold metal. My mind screamed, "Turn back, walk away, forget this garage." But another voice, the echo of Grandpa's, pushed me forward. "Don't fear failure, Sophia. Fear never taking the first step." I twisted hard. The lock gave way with a dry, metallic clunk. The hinges groaned as I pushed the door, the sound echoing through the empty street like a warning. A gust of stale air hit my face, thick with dust, oil, and time. I switched on my phone's flashlight, its beam weak against the suffocating dark. My stomach tightened as the light swept over rotting crates and rusted tools scattered across a cracked floor. Cobwebs dangled like curtains, swaying in the draft. "So this is it," I muttered bitterly, my voice trembling. My grand inheritance, a graveyard for scrap metal. Yet something pulled me deeper. I stepped inside, each footfall stirring clouds of dust. The silence pressed down on me, heavy and watchful, as though the shadows themselves were holding their breath. Then my light caught something at the far wall, a smaller metal door, bolted shut, half hidden behind a stack of crates. My pulse spiked. Unlike the rest of the garage, it looked deliberate. Important. I approached, brushing cobwebs aside, and gasped when I saw the brass plaque screwed into the door. My heart stuttered. The engraving was faint but unmistakable. Sophia's birthday. My knees went weak. My hands trembled so violently I nearly dropped the phone. Grandpa hadn't just left me a garage. He'd left me a message. I staggered back a step, my breathing shallow, staring at the door that seemed to whisper my name. For the first time since holding that cursed key, humiliation melted into something else. Fear, anticipation, and the terrifying sense that whatever lay beyond would change everything. My hands shook so badly I had to steady the flashlight against my chest. The brass plaque gleamed under the thin beam, its letters spelling out my own birthday. Grandpa had left this here for me, no one else. I swallowed hard, wiping my sweaty palms on my jeans, and reached for the lock. It was a combination dial, old and stiff with rust. My heart pounded as I turned the numbers month, day, year, each click loud in the silence. For a second, nothing happened. Then came a soft, deliberate click. The lock released. I froze, staring at it, my breath caught in my throat. My hand hovered over the bolt. Should I open it? What if it was a cruel joke, rats, mold, or nothing at all? But then Grandpa's voice seemed to echo inside me. Don't fear failure, Sophia. Fear never taking the first step. I pulled the bolt. The small door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. A wave of cold, damp air rushed up, smelling of earth and metal. My flashlight beam wavered as I pointed it down the steps. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my feet moved anyway. One step, then another. The iron door clanged shut behind me, sealing me in the shadows. The deeper I went, the colder it grew, until goosebumps prickled across my skin. My breath fogged in the stale air. The stairs ended in a pitch-black basement. I swept the flashlight across the space and froze. The light caught something stacked neatly on iron shelves, row after row glimmering with a dull yellow glow. My heart stuttered. I blinked, unable to believe it. Gold. Dozens. No. Hundreds of solid bars of gold lined the racks, stacked in perfect order. Their surfaces caught the beam and shimmered as if mocking me with their brilliance. My knees buckled. I stumbled forward, reaching out with trembling fingers. The moment I touched one, its cold weight nearly dragged my hand down. I gasped, my pulse roaring in my ears. This can't be real. But it was. Everywhere I turned, gold surrounded me. Not dusty junk, not a forgotten garage. A hidden vault worth more than anything I'd ever dreamed of. I staggered to the center of the basement where a small iron table stood. On it lay a single envelope, sealed with red wax. My name was scrawled across the front in Grandpa's shaky handwriting. For Sophia. My throat closed. Tears stung my eyes as I snatched it up, my fingers trembling so hard I nearly dropped it. I broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. Dear Sophia, if you are reading this, you have found the vault. What you see is not a gift to keep for yourself. It is a challenge. This gold belongs to those who need it more than you. Your task is to deliver it to the 5 addresses listed on the racks. Everything you need is prepared. I am sorry for placing this burden on you, but I believe you are the only one who can fulfill it. Be strong, Sophia. I have always believed in you. Grandpa, the letter slipped from my fingers, fluttering to the floor. Not mine. Not a reward. A burden. I sank onto the cold concrete, clutching my head. My whole body shook. For years I'd been mocked as worthless, left behind by my family. Now, I had in front of me the power to silence them all, to live the life I'd only dreamed of. Mansions, respect, freedom, everything I'd ever wanted shimmered on those shelves, and Grandpa was asking me to give it all away. I pressed my forehead to my knees, my tears dampening the dusty fabric of my jeans. I didn't know whether to laugh, scream, or cry. The vault seemed to close in on me, its silent glow demanding an answer. "Why, Grandpa?" I whispered into the still air. "Why me?" No reply came. Only the echo of my own voice bouncing back from the concrete walls. But one phrase lingered, written in his shaky hand, cutting deeper than all the rest. "I believe in you." I closed my eyes, the gold's brilliance searing my thoughts. For the first time in my life, I had something powerful in my hands, but it was also the heaviest burden I'd ever known. The envelope lay crumpled beside me, its words still carved into my mind like fire. "This gold is not yours to keep. Deliver it. I believe in you." And I lifted my head slowly, my eyes burning. The gold bars gleamed from their shelves, rows upon rows, each one shimmering like a promise. My breath came in shallow bursts. "Not mine?" I whispered bitterly. "Then, whose is it, Grandpa? Why would you leave me this, only to tell me I can't keep it?" I pushed myself to my feet, my knees shaking. My flashlight beams swept over the stacks again, making the vault blaze with light. I stumbled forward and picked up a bar with both hands. It was heavier than I expected, its cold surface biting into my palms. I held it up to my face, my heart racing. "One bar," I muttered, my voice trembling. "Just one. Who would ever know?" Images crashed into my mind, me striding into a dealership, tossing down cash for a gleaming red sports car. Me walking into Ethan's law office, designer heels clicking against marble floors, watching his arrogant smirk fall away. Me handing Dad the title deed to a mansion bigger than his, forcing him to choke on his contempt. I squeezed the bar tighter, my nails scraping against the metal. My chest rose and fell rapidly. For the first time in my life, I could be more than nothing. But then, unbidden, another image came. Grandpa's eyes, warm and steady, the way they had looked at me when I was a little girl. His voice echoed in my ears, cutting through the fever of temptation. "Wealth isn't what you keep for yourself, Sophia, but what you're willing to give away." I dropped the bar, the clang echoing through the vault. My hands shook violently. "Why, Grandpa?" I shouted into the emptiness, my voice cracking. "Why me? Do you know what it's like to be laughed at every day, to be treated like garbage by your own family? You had everything, and you leave me this choice?" Tears blurred my vision. I grabbed another bar, hugging it to my chest like a lifeline. Its weight was crushing, yet intoxicating. I could run. Right now. I could find a buyer on the black market, turn just one bar into millions. I wouldn't have to live in that suffocating apartment anymore. No more instant noodles, no more secondhand clothes, no more sitting alone while everyone else celebrated success. "Maybe he was wrong about me," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Maybe I'm not strong enough. Maybe I don't care about being noble or selfless." The vault was silent, but the memory of his handwriting pierced through me. "Be strong, Sophia. I believe in you." I pressed my back against the cold wall, sliding down until I sat on the floor again, clutching the bar. My mind spun in circles, tugged violently between desire and duty. Every time I imagined holding on to the gold, I felt a wave of relief, a vision of freedom. But every time I thought of Grandpa's voice, guilt seared me like a blade. I buried my face in my hands, my tears soaking my palms. "I don't know what to do," I whispered, broken. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. The air was freezing, the weight of the vault pressing down on me until I could hardly breathe. Finally, with trembling hands, I set the bar back on the shelf. The sound of metal clinking against metal was final, like a lock snapping shut. I wiped my face with my sleeve, my chest aching. "If this is what you wanted, Grandpa, I'll try. But God help me, I don't know if I can." I stood, unsteady but determined, staring at the envelope once more. The list of addresses scribbled inside seemed to glow with their own gravity. 5 destinations. 5 burdens. I clenched the paper in my fist. The temptation still burned like fire in my veins, but beneath it, faint and fragile, a spark of something else flickered. Hope. The paper in my hand felt heavier than the gold itself. 5 addresses, scrawled in Grandpa's shaky handwriting. 5 places that would decide whether I honored him or betrayed him. I packed 1 crate into the back of a borrowed truck, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the city's noises. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror, I expected flashing red and blue lights, or a dark car tailing me. The thought of being stopped by police chilled me. What could I say? Yes, officer, I'm just transporting millions in unmarked gold bars. The first address led me north, into the Adirondack Mountains. The drive took 3 long days. Each stop for gas felt like a death sentence. I locked the truck, but my eyes darted constantly to the trunk. When strangers lingered too close, I broke out in sweat. By the time I reached the small cabin tucked deep in the pines, my nerves were frayed. Snow crunched beneath my boots as I dragged the heavy crate up the creaking porch. I knocked, and the door opened to reveal an old man with sharp eyes clouded by age. "Henry?" I asked, my breath fogging in the icy air. He nodded slowly, gripping his cane. "William's granddaughter." His voice cracked, weighted with memory. I pushed the crate inside, my arms trembling from the effort. When Henry saw the gold, his expression didn't change to greed, but sorrow. He ran his weathered hand across the bars like they were relics, not treasure. "During the war," he whispered, his eyes glistening, "your grandfather saved our entire platoon. He took a bullet, and never once called himself a hero, but to us, he was everything." Tears pricked my eyes as Henry gripped my hand. "You have his eyes, Sophia. The eyes of someone who will do what's right, no matter how hard." I couldn't speak. I just nodded, my throat tight, before stepping back into the cold. The second address was a world away. Boston. I ditched the truck, terrified of drawing attention, and chose the train. The gold was wrapped in thick cloth, disguised as cargo. Still, every creak of the wheels, every glance from a passenger made me stiffen. I sat pressed against the crate for 10 sleepless hours, sweat dripping down my back despite the winter chill. Boston's skyline loomed, sharp and modern. The address led me to a sleek glass high-rise overlooking the harbor. Inside, a man in his 60s stood tall in an immaculate suit. "Charles Donovan," he introduced himself, extending a hand. His grip was firm but not unkind. I opened the crate. The gold glinted under the office lights. Donovan's eyes softened, and a sad smile tugged at his lips. "That's William's style," he murmured, always keeping his word, no matter how impossible it seemed. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and gestured for me to sit. "Your grandfather started from nothing, a car mechanic with dirt under his fingernails. But he built an empire not by cutting throats, but by keeping promises. Integrity, he said, it was a man's greatest wealth." He slid a folded note across the desk. My heart raced as I opened it. In Grandpa's handwriting, just 5 words. "Keep your integrity, Sophia. Gold is secondary." Tears blurred my vision. I clutched the paper as Donovan leaned closer. "He chose you for a reason. Don't doubt that." That night, as I boarded the train back, I pressed the note against my chest. Henry's words about heroism, Donovan's about integrity, they collided with Grandpa's echo in my mind, but temptation still slithered within me. Each time I glanced at the next crate waiting in the storage car, I imagined running, disappearing, living the life of wealth I'd been denied. Yet every time I thought of that, Henry's voice pierced me. "You have his eyes, Donovan's. Gold is secondary, and Grandpa's, steady and unyielding. I believe in you." I closed my eyes, exhaustion pulling me under as the train rumbled into the night. Ahead of me still lay 3 addresses, 3 burdens heavier than any gold bar. And I wondered, would I be strong enough to carry them all? The desert sun was merciless as I drove toward Tucson, Arizona. The truck rattled along the empty highway, its engine groaning under the weight of the last few crates. Sweat soaked through my shirt, stinging my skin. My hands clutched the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles blanched white. Each mile dragged like a punishment. I hadn't slept properly in days, my mind haunted by temptation, my body aching from lifting crates heavier than I ever imagined. I was exhausted, but I couldn't stop. Grandpa's list burned in my pocket like a brand. The nursing home sat on the city's edge, a squat building surrounded by a garden of wildflowers. I dragged the crate inside, nearly collapsing from the effort. A nurse with silver-streaked hair greeted me with wide, startled eyes as she saw the gleaming bars. "William," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He never forgot us." Her name was Susan, the director of the home. She led me to a common room where elderly residents sat in worn armchairs, some gazing out the windows, others playing chess with shaking hands. When Susan mentioned my grandfather's name, the room fell silent. An old man grasped my hand, tears streaming down his weathered face. He gave us blankets in winter, meals when we had nothing. He never once visited, but we always prayed for him. I bit my lips so hard I tasted blood, my chest tightening until it hurt to breathe. Tears blurred my vision as I placed the gold in Susan's hands. "It was his wish," I whispered, my voice breaking. That night, I stayed for dinner with the residents. A simple meal of mashed potatoes and stew, yet it tasted richer than anything I'd eaten in years. Laughter filled the room, stories of my grandfather spilling from every corner. Pride swelled inside me, but so did pain. How could I measure up to a man like him? The next morning, I left for Chicago, the final address. My body screamed for rest, but adrenaline kept me going. The Horizon Charity Foundation towered in the city center, its glass walls reflecting the cold sky. I dragged the last crate through the gleaming lobby, sweat pouring down my temples. The receptionist's polite smile faltered as I slid Grandpa's letter across the desk. Minutes later, I was ushered into the office of Mr. Carter, the foundation's director. When I said my grandfather's name, his face froze. He touched the gold with trembling hands, eyes glistening. "William Carter was one of our most discreet founders," he said, his voice cracking. "He built hospitals, scholarships, disaster relief, always anonymously, never for glory, always for people." He showed me folders thick with documents, photographs of children in rural hospitals, students clutching diplomas, families in disaster zones receiving food. Every page bore Grandpa's unseen mark. "You've brought the final piece," Carter said softly. "Not just gold, Sophia, but your grandfather's legacy." My knees wobbled, my throat closed. I set the crate down, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. I left the building into a drizzle of cold rain. Chicago's streets blurred before me, neon lights bleeding in the wet pavement. I stumbled to the truck, collapsed into the driver's seat, and let the sobs break free. It was done. All the gold was gone, every last bar, and yet I felt hollow. I drove aimlessly until I found myself back in the industrial district, before the rusted door of the garage. The rain hammered down, soaking me to the bone. I pushed the door open and descended into the empty basement. The shelves that once gleamed with fortune now stood barren, shadows stretching like skeletal fingers. I sank to the floor, hugging my knees, rocking like a child. My voice cracked as I whispered into the void. "I did it, Grandpa. I gave it all away, and now I'm left with nothing." The silence was unbearable. My sobs echoed against the concrete walls. For years I'd been mocked, belittled, cast aside, and for a fleeting moment, I had held the power to change it all. But now the gold was gone, the dreams dissolved, and I was the same, Sophia Carter, tired, broke, invisible. Lightning cracked outside, illuminating the basement in a ghostly glow. I pressed my forehead to the cold floor, my tears mixing with the dust. "I wasn't strong enough," I choked. "I just obeyed. And for what? I still have nothing." The despair was suffocating, so heavy I thought it might crush me. But in that darkness, one memory returned. Grandpa's eyes, steady and kind, whispering, "I believe in you." The words tore me apart, because at that moment, I didn't believe in myself. The basement was silent, except for my uneven breaths. My eyes were swollen from crying, my body drained of every ounce of strength. I thought I would stay there forever, curled up against the empty racks that once held a fortune. Then creak. The sound of the iron door above made my heart jolt. My flashlight beam trembled toward the staircase. Footsteps descended slowly, deliberate. My chest tightened as a tall man in a dark suit appeared, his hair streaked with silver, his eyes sharp but calm. He stopped at the bottom step. "Sophia Carter?" I pushed myself up, pressing against the wall. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" My voice cracked, half in fear, half in anger. He inclined his head. "Arthur Hayes, your grandfather's private lawyer. I've been waiting for this day." My stomach dropped. "Private lawyer? Grandpa already had one. Mr. Harper, he read the will." Arthur's lips curved faintly. "Harper was for the public. I was for matters William kept hidden. This vault was never about inheritance, it was about you." I shook my head, dizzy. How did you know I'd be here?" He stepped closer, setting a leather briefcase on the iron table. "Your grandfather instructed me to monitor your journey. This place is wired with a silent alarm. When you opened the vault weeks ago, I knew. And when the last gold left these shelves, I knew you'd return." The room spun. My legs felt weak. "So this was all planned?" Arthur nodded, unlocking the briefcase. Inside lay a thick envelope sealed with red wax. He pushed it toward me. "For you, when the task is complete." My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Grandpa's handwriting filled the first page. "Dear Sophia, if you are reading this, then you did what I hoped you chose. Integrity over greed, compassion over pride. The gold was never meant to be yours. It was meant to test your strength, to prove whether you could carry not just wealth, but responsibility. You did not fail me. You have fulfilled my last wish. And now, you are ready." I gasped as Arthur placed several documents on the table. Bank accounts, real estate deeds, stock certificates, all under my name. Arthur's voice was steady. "Your grandfather established a trust years ago, valued at $10 million. It's yours now." The words struck me like thunder. My knees buckled, and I dropped into the nearest chair, clutching the papers. $10 million? Tears streamed down my face. My voice shook. Why? Why didn't he just give me this from the start? Arthur's eyes softened. "Because William wanted you to understand that money alone means nothing. You had to prove to yourself that you were worthy of it. And you did." I covered my face with my hands, sobs racking my body. For weeks, I had lived on the edge of despair, torn apart by temptation and exhaustion. And now, at the end of it all, I realized Grandpa had been guiding me every step of the way. I whispered into the silence. "You believed in me, Grandpa. And now, I finally believe in myself." Arthur closed the briefcase. "This trust isn't just money, Sophia. It's a legacy. Use it as he would have, quietly, selflessly, with courage." I nodded through tears, gripping the documents like a lifeline. When Arthur left, I remained in the basement a while longer. The shelves were empty, but I no longer felt hollow. The darkness no longer seemed oppressive. It felt like a cocoon I was breaking free from. Finally, I rose, walking up the staircase. The rain outside had stopped, and the city lights shimmered against the wet pavement. I stood at the threshold of the garage, breathing in the cool night air. For the first time, I didn't feel like nothing. I was Sophia Carter, heir not only to my grandfather's fortune, but to his faith, his integrity, and his legacy. And I swore, as I stepped into the moonlit street, that I would live every day worthy of it.